AMD's actually doing it. They're working on a monster GPU for enthusiasts this generation. Forget the 9070 XT, Nvidia is in trouble. But before I get to that, the 9060 XT listings drop with prices, and AMD's next GPU is a serious performer. Welcome everyone to GamerMeld. Okay, it's news time, and first up for today, we have some models of the 9060 XT that were listed online, and these include prices that I honestly think are great news. If you remember when the 9070 launched, there were some really weird problems. First, they did have MSRP models, but they disappeared pretty quickly. What was left were really high-priced GPUs, much more of a price jump than you would expect from an overclocked card. Later, we found out that AMD really did their pricing last minute, so last minute that they had to give rebates to retailers so they could sell the cards at MSRP. The issue is that, as you can see here, it says AMD's rebate system is flawed because it primarily rebates MSRP models. This means that non-MSRP models are not rebated, hence there's a visible gap between certain cards on the market. The problem with selective rebates is particularly problematic in Europe and Australian markets, where the price hike was much faster on the 9070 series. Either way, as you can see, we were talking, $600 to $750, $800. Basically, when they only rebated the base model to bring it down to MSRP, the other models were more expensive based on the more expensive MSRP. So then that price gap was much higher. And the good news here is that it looks like AMD has corrected this for the 9060 XT launch. As you can see right here, we have a few GPUs from ASRock, with the 9060 XT 8GB Challenger being $320, then the 16GB Challenger $369, then the 16GB Steel Legend $389. Now, you're probably thinking, yeah, but these are more expensive, but these are overclocked variants. You can see right here the two Challenger models are $20, so only $20 more expensive than the MSRP model for both the 8GB and 16GB trims. Now, the Steel Legend is $40 more expensive, but that's still nowhere near as bad as what we saw before. They go on to state that Central Computer's listings don't say it, but the higher prices are likely justified by the addition of a factory overclock on all three models. Now, I will say that there's no guarantee that these aren't OC cards, but I did look them up and it seems like every single one of them are overclocked variants. So $20, even $40 is nowhere near as bad as some of the ones that we saw before. So if this does end up being the final price, and of course this is at Central Computers retailer, this is a California exclusive retail chain, but if these are right, especially across the board, this launch looks to be much better. And next up for today, we have a performance leak for the 9060 XT, and let's just say it looks awesome. Now, really quickly, I know AI has gotten annoying at this point. It seems like it's all anyone talks about, but let's be honest, there's a good reason for that. So you probably do want to learn how it actually works and make sure you have the skills for a world dominated by AI. Luckily, there's no better place to learn it than this video's sponsor, Brilliant, the one place I go when I want to learn something new in tech, like their newly expanded course on AI that goes through not only large language models, but image models and more. And what really makes Brilliant stand out is in the way they teach you. Instead of memorizing a bunch of stuff or watching videos, you learn by actually doing it with their engaging and even fun puzzles. Whether it's learning how to code or making circuits, Brilliant makes learning easier than ever. But don't take my word for it, because you can try it out yourself with their free trial when you visit brilliant.org/gamermeld. Plus, when you sign up with brilliant.org/gamermeld, you'll get 20% off their annual premium. So there's no reason not to check it out. Once again, that's brilliant.org/gamermeld. As you can see right down here, this comes from Reddit and it's a leaked Time Spy benchmark where you can see it does say the 9060 XT, and at least if this is correct, it scores for the graphics score a whopping 17,069. And the reason that's so interesting is because you can see it's essentially the same as the average score of the 7700 XT. And I'll get to why that's such a big deal in just a second, but I do want to point out that according to the user, for them to be able to reach this, they had to get to 3.46 gigahertz at 199 watts. So obviously this does include an overclock and a fairly decent one at that, but I will actually say at 199 watts, that's actually less than the 7700 XT, but the really big reason why this is such a big deal is because when the 7700 XT launched, it was around, I think, either $60 or $70 more than the 9060 XT would be going on sale for. And obviously, don't forget that this is just Time Spy. So yes, it beats it at, DirectX 12 games, things like that. But obviously, with it being RDNA 4, it's set to be significantly faster at ray tracing. So this is definitely looking like a much better overall GPU. But not only that, even now, of course, you might be thinking, well, that was MSRP at launch, but even now, the 7700 XT is more like $100 plus more dollars than the MSRP of the 9060 XT. So that is definitely pretty impressive. With that said, obviously, I really just think that this series of GPUs have been such a letdown that something like this that would have been completely commonplace, a few generations back is like really exciting now. Honestly, it really just goes to show the terrible state of the GPU market right now, but I'll take wins where I can get them, and this definitely looks like a win. And lastly for today, I'm super excited to share this one with you because AMD is apparently set to launch a much faster RX 9000 GPU than the 9070 XT. We'll call it a 9080 XT or maybe even 9090 XT. I'm talking a huge performance jump, more memory, it's great. And it makes perfect sense because I think it's AMD realizing that they have a massive advantage over Nvidia this time around. Besides the fact that the RTX 50 series has been a huge disappointment, they know that they can have a much better price point over Nvidia. One reason is likely because they upped the performance per core with RDNA 4 so they could do things like massively lower the die size of the chip and save a bunch of money because they have fewer cores. And with this knowledge, according to a new video from Moore's Law is Dead, AMD is preparing a more powerful RDNA 4 chip, and this bad boy has a ton of stuff going for it. So I'm just going to go over this list and I'll put something on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. Starting things off, first up, they mention game clock. Now, this is game clock, not boost clock, which is less than boost clock, of around 3.4 to 3.7 gigahertz. Obviously, a massive boost over the 9070 XT. Then we're looking at, this one is really surprising, but I'll get to why he's fairly certain this is correct. We're looking at apparently 256-bit GDDR7 memory, and that is up to 32 gigabytes of memory, maybe 16 or 24 gigabyte models, but up to 32 gigabytes. Now, because of all of this, we are looking at potentially 450 plus watts, but with that, so clearly this is not with more cores or anything like that. We are essentially looking at the same chip, obviously heavily binned, so we could get to these wild game clocks, but with more memory, massive clocks with much faster memory, we are looking at between 15 and 45% faster than the 9070 XT. According to him, they are, with their tests, are looking at around an average of 28% faster, though the difference is very wide. I mean, we're talking 15 to 45% faster, very much depending on the game. But with that, that means that we're looking at up there with either the 5080 or maybe even the 5080 Super, meaning it could be around the 4090's performance. And according to this, he has heard this from multiple sources. Not only that, he's heard from one source that we're talking faster variants of RDNA 4 cards. They mentioned that, but then They even mentioned that there might even be a full refresh later this year, and later this year is what they're hearing as far as when this GPU would release. And it's later this year that we are talking those faster variants, and yeah, I mean, it could be more than one GPU, maybe a 9080 and 9090, because we're talking 16 or 24 and maybe even up to 32 gigabytes of memory, so this could be a couple different GPUs. Now, you might think that all of this kind of sounds far-fetched, because especially when we're talking that GDDR7 memory, but according to another source, they actually mentioned a 48 gigabyte professional model later this year, which would mean that it would have to use GDDR7. Basically, NVIDIA may need to seriously start worrying.